The autumn of 1884 brought violence to the Texas borderlands that would forever change the meaning of courage and kinship along the Rio Grande. When weathered rancher Jacob Hayes witnessed a band of ruthless outlaws attacking a small Apache hunting party near his property line, every instinct told him to ride away and preserve his own safety. Instead, the 50-year-old former Confederate soldier made a choice that defied all frontier logic. He charged directly into the gunfight, outnumbered 6-1, to defend people his own culture had taught him to fear. What unfolded during those explosive minutes of combat, and the Apache chief's unprecedented response 3 days later, would shatter every assumption about loyalty, family, and the bonds that transcend blood in ways that neither territorial law nor ancient tradition had ever imagined possible. Chapter 1. Thunder Across the Valley. The Texas borderlands shimmered under the October sun as Jacob Hayes guided his horse along the ridge overlooking Coyote Valley, his weathered hands steady on the reins despite 50 years of hard living etched into every callus and scar. The autumn of 1884 had brought unusual tension to the territory, with Mexican bandits growing bolder in their raids across the Rio Grande, while Apache bands moved through traditional hunting grounds that settlers increasingly claimed as private property. Jacob had learned to navigate these dangerous currents through careful neutrality, avoiding conflicts that didn't directly threaten his isolated ranch 20 miles from the near settlement. The crack of rifle fire shattered the afternoon stillness, echoing across the valley with the distinctive rhythm of an ambush rather than a hunting expedition. Jacob reined in his mount, every instinct from his Confederate cavalry days triggering heightened awareness as he assessed the tactical situation unfolding below. Through the mesquite and juniper trees, he could make out mounted figures circling a small group of Apache hunters who had taken defensive positions behind a cluster of limestone boulders. 6 bandits, their sombreros and crossed ammunition belts marking them as the same raiders who had terrorized local settlements for months, poured devastating fire into the Apache position. The hunters, outnumbered and caught in poor terrain, returned fire with disciplined precision despite their desperate situation. Jacob recognized the tactical hopelessness of their position. Without intervention, the Apache warriors would be overwhelmed within minutes. Common sense dictated immediate withdrawal from this dangerous scene. These weren't his people, and frontier law offered no protection for those who inserted themselves into conflicts between outlaws and indigenous peoples. The smart choice involved riding away quietly, preserving his own safety while avoiding entanglement in violence that territorial authorities would likely blame on him regardless of actual circumstances. Yet something deeper than logic stirred within Jacob's chest as he watched one young Apache warrior, barely past boyhood, take a bullet in the shoulder while shielding an elder behind the rocks. The boy's courage, his willingness to sacrifice himself for his people, triggered memories of similar desperate stands during the war when honor mattered more than survival. Jacob drew his Winchester from its saddle scabbard, checked the ammunition in his Colt revolvers, and spurred his horse down the treacherous slope toward the firefight. His war cry, perfected on dozens of Civil War battlefields, announced his arrival as he charged directly into the bandits' flank, understanding that he had just signed what might be his own death warrant for people who had every reason to consider him an enemy. Chapter 2. Blood and Bullets. Jacob's cavalry charge caught the bandits completely off guard, his first shots dropping 2 raiders before they could wheel their horses to face this unexpected threat. Years of military training guided his movements as he used his mount's momentum to crash through their formation, creating chaos that disrupted their coordinated assault on the Apache position. His twin Colts barked repeatedly, each shot placed with the deadly precision of someone who had survived 4 years of war through superior marksmanship. The Apache warriors immediately recognized the tactical opportunity Jacob's intervention created, intensifying their fire to exploit the bandits' confusion. The young warrior with the shoulder wound, despite his injury, managed to bring down another raider with a well-placed rifle shot. The elder beside him, who Jacob would later learn was Eagle Claw, a respected war chief, directed the defensive fire with hand signals that demonstrated decades of combat experience. A bandit's bullet caught Jacob in the left thigh, nearly unseating him as white-hot pain shot through his leg. Another round grazed his ribs, tearing through his shirt and leaving a burning furrow across his side. He gritted his teeth against the agony, maintaining his assault even as blood soaked through his worn canvas pants. The remaining 3 bandits, realizing their ambush had transformed into a death trap, attempted to flee toward the Mexican border. Jacob's Winchester spoke with authority, dropping one fleeing bandit from his saddle at 70 yards. The Apache warriors' coordinated fire caught another, while the last raider disappeared over the ridge, spurring his horse desperately towards safety. The entire engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes, transforming the valley from a killing field into an eerie silence broken only by the groaning of wounded men and nervous horses. Eagle Claw emerged cautiously from behind the rocks, his rifle still trained on Jacob despite the rancher's obvious injuries. The mutual wariness between rescuer and rescued hung thick in the afternoon air. Jacob understood their suspicion. White men who involved themselves in Apache affairs usually brought nothing but trouble, regardless of initial appearances. The young wounded warrior approached Jacob's horse, speaking rapid Apache that carried notes of both gratitude and confusion. Blood continued flowing from Jacob's wounds, and darkness began creeping into the edges of his vision. He managed to holster his weapons, raising empty hands to show peaceful intentions before swaying dangerously in his saddle. The last thing he remembered was strong hands catching him as he fell, and voices speaking in a language he didn't understand, their tones suggesting a debate about what to do with this unexpected ally. Chapter 3: Wounds and Recognition. Jacob awakened to unfamiliar sensations. The scent of burning sage, the soft murmur of voices speaking Apache, and the surprising absence of pain from wounds that should have been agonizing. His eyes opened to find himself lying on a bed of soft furs inside what appeared to be a traditional wickiup, sunlight filtering through the woven branches above. An elderly Apache woman sat beside him, grinding herbs in a stone bowl while humming a melody that seemed ancient as the desert itself. The young warrior he had seen wounded during the firefight entered the shelter, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but his movement suggesting rapid healing. Behind him came Eagle Claw, the war chief whose tactical expertise had helped turn the battle's tide. The elder's face bore an expression of profound contemplation as he studied the white rancher who had inexplicably risked everything for Apache lives. Through a mixture of broken English, Spanish, and elaborate gestures, Eagle Claw began revealing truths that made Jacob's intervention even more significant than he had realized. The young warrior was Stone Wolf's son, Black Hawk, heir to leadership of the entire band and carrier of sacred knowledge essential for his people's survival. The bandits hadn't randomly attacked hunters. They had been paid to eliminate specific Apache leaders by interests wanting to clear the land for development. The medicine woman's treatments had saved Jacob's leg from the infection that would have claimed it, using knowledge passed through generations about desert plants and their healing properties. Eagle Claw explained that the band remained divided about their unexpected savior. Some saw divine intervention in Jacob's appearance, while others suspected an elaborate trap despite evidence to the contrary. What struck Jacob most powerfully was Black Hawk's unwavering advocacy for him among the skeptics. The young warrior spoke passionately about honor transcending race, about debts that could only be repaid through sacred bonds. His words carried weight because he had witnessed Jacob taking bullets meant for Apache bodies, spilling his blood for people he had no obligation to defend. Chapter 4: The Council's Deliberation. 3 days after the firefight, Chief Stone Wolf convened a formal council that would determine Jacob Hayes' fate and the implications of his extraordinary intervention. The Apache leader, whose presence commanded immediate respect through decades of strategic brilliance against Mexican and American forces, had returned from a distant negotiation to find his son alive solely because a white rancher had charged into certain death. The council assembled traditionally, with elders, war chiefs, and spiritual leaders forming a circle around the sacred fire that had burned continuously for generations. Stone Wolf's weathered face revealed nothing as testimony began, but his dark eyes studied every speaker with intensity that suggested this decision would shape his band's future in ways that extended beyond one man's fate. Black Hawk stood first, his wounded shoulders still wrapped, but his voice strong as he recounted the battle in precise detail. He emphasized how Jacob had charged the bandits' strongest position, drawing their deadliest fire upon himself to create opportunities for Apache survival. The young warrior's account carried special weight because he spoke as both witness and beneficiary of the rancher's sacrifice. He described Jacob's military precision, the calculated risks that revealed training beyond typical frontier experience. Singing Bird, the band's most revered spiritual leader, shared visions received during the ceremony. Dreams of a pale rider whose blood would water the desert soil, creating new growth between peoples who had known only conflict. These prophecies, recorded in sacred memory long before Jacob's birth, suggested divine orchestration behind the violent encounter. The medicine woman who had healed Jacob testified about his behavior during recovery, noting his respect for Apache customs despite obvious unfamiliarity, and his refusal to reveal the band's location even while delirious from fever. Opposition came from Dark Cloud, a warrior who had lost family to Texas Rangers and viewed all white settlers as irredeemable enemies. He argued that saving Jacob created dangerous obligations, potentially compromising the band's security if the rancher proved false. Others worried about territorial authorities' reaction to Apache settler cooperation, fearing military retaliation against perceived alliances. The heated debate reflected generations of betrayal and violence that couldn't be easily forgotten. Chief Stone Wolf listened for hours without speaking, absorbing every perspective while consulting ancient precedents that governed such unprecedented situations. Finally, as stars began appearing in the desert sky, he stood to deliver judgment that would echo through Apache oral history. The debt created by Jacob's willing sacrifice transcended normal gratitude. It demanded recognition through the highest honor their culture could bestow upon an outsider. His decision would require another council, but this time, one of ceremony rather than deliberation. Chapter 5, Dawn of the Third Day. The pre-dawn mist hung low across the Texas rangeland as Jacob Hayes struggled to complete his morning chores despite wounds that still protested every movement. 3 days had passed since the Apache had returned him to his ranch, their medicine woman's treatments having saved his life but leaving him weak and disoriented. He had expected never to see them again, assuming his intervention would become just another strange tale lost to the unforgiving borderlands where violence and mercy intersected in unpredictable ways. The thunder of approaching hooves reached him before the riders became visible through the morning fog, the sound carrying a ceremonial rhythm rather than the chaos of a raid. Jacob limped toward his cabin's door, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he kept mounted there, though something in the measured approach suggested this visit carried different intentions than frontier violence typically delivered. What emerged from the mist exceeded anything Jacob's 5 decades of experience had prepared him to witness. Chief Stone Wolf led the procession, his bearing radiating authority that commanded respect across cultural boundaries. Behind him rode 50 Apache warriors in full ceremonial dress, their faces painted with symbols that spoke of spiritual significance beyond mere warfare. Eagle feathers adorned their hair, while sacred items hung from decorated lances that caught the early morning light. The women followed on foot, carrying bundles wrapped in beautifully woven blankets that suggested gifts of profound importance. Children walked among them, their usually playful nature subdued by the gravity of this unprecedented gathering. Even the dogs that typically accompanied the band maintained unusual silence, as if understanding that this moment would reshape relationships that had been fixed in hostility for generations. Black Hawk rode beside his father, his wounded shoulder still bandaged, but his posture proud as he met Jacob's bewildered gaze. The young warrior's presence served as a living reminder of why this extraordinary assembly had materialized at an isolated ranch that most Apaches would typically avoid. Singing Bird, the spiritual leader whose prophecies had influenced the chief's decision, carried items wrapped in white deerskin that radiated ceremonial importance through their careful handling. Chief Stone Wolf dismounted with fluid grace despite his advanced years, approaching Jacob with measured steps that suggested careful protocol. When he spoke, his voice carried across the morning air with clarity that needed no translation despite the language barrier. The tone conveyed respect, gratitude, and something deeper, a recognition of kinship that transcended blood or birthright. The chief gestured toward the assembled band, then to Jacob, and finally to the rising sun that painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. His movements told a story of debt and honor, of bonds forged through sacrifice that created obligations beyond normal cultural boundaries. The medicine woman approached, carrying pottery vessels filled with sacred preparations that would mark Jacob's transformation from stranger to family. Jacob understood with crystalline clarity that his life was about to change in ways that no amount of frontier experience could have predicted. The ceremony about to unfold would rewrite not just his personal story, but the very definition of family and belonging in the harsh borderlands. Chapter 6. Father of Two Peoples. The adoption ceremony began as the morning sun climbed higher into the Texas sky, transforming Jacob Hayes's modest ranch into sacred ground that would forever mark the intersection of two cultures previously divided by violence and mistrust. Chief Stone Wolf raised his weathered hands to the four directions, invoking spiritual forces that had guided the Apache people since time immemorial, while Singing Bird prepared the ceremonial items that would formalize bonds stronger than blood itself. The ritual unfolded with ancient precision that required no translation for Jacob to understand its profound significance. The medicine woman approached with a clay bowl containing sacred paint made from ochre, crushed turquoise, and plants known only to Apache healers, their combined properties creating pigments that carried spiritual power beyond mere decoration. She marked Jacob's forehead with symbols that designated him as a father within their clan structure, each careful stroke representing responsibilities and privileges that few outsiders had ever received. Black Hawk stepped forward to present his own war lance, the weapon that had protected him through countless dangers and represented his emerging status as a future leader. By placing this precious item in Jacob's hands, the young warrior created reciprocal obligations that bound them as father and son according to Apache law, relationships that transcended the racial divisions that territorial society insisted were insurmountable. The weight of the lance spoke of trust earned through blood spilled in a common cause, a sacrifice that had proven character beyond words or promises. Chief Stone Wolf's speech, delivered in Apache but somehow understood through the universal language of gesture and tone, recounted the battle that had brought them together and the prophecies that had foretold such an unlikely alliance. He spoke of courage that transcended cultural boundaries, of honor that recognized no racial distinctions when lives hung in the balance. The assembled band responded with rhythmic chants that rose and fell like desert wind, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to emerge from the land itself. The gifts presented to Jacob carried meanings that extended far beyond material value. A war shirt decorated with porcupine quills and sacred beads would identify him as an Apache family to any member of their nation, providing protection and hospitality throughout territories where white ranchers typically faced hostility. A medicine bundle, prepared by Singing Bird himself, contained items that would guard against both physical and spiritual dangers, its power derived from ceremonies conducted over multiple generations. Most significantly, Stone Wolf declared Jacob's ranch as neutral ground under Apache protection, a designation that would transform the isolated property into a haven where cultural exchange could occur without fear of violence from either society. This decree carried practical implications that would reshape regional dynamics, creating opportunities for trade, communication, and understanding that military force had failed to achieve through decades of conflict. The ceremony's conclusion came as the sun reached its zenith, with the entire band singing Jacob's new name in their language, Fights for Others, a designation that would be remembered in oral histories passed through generations. Women prepared a feast using provisions they had brought, sharing traditional foods that Jacob had never tasted, while children gradually overcame their shyness to explore the ranch buildings with curiosity that suggested futures where such cultural mixing might become commonplace. As the Apache band prepared to depart in late afternoon, Chief Stone Wolf clasped Jacob's shoulders in the manner of a father acknowledging a son, their eyes meeting in understanding that transcended the need for shared language. The transformation was complete. Jacob Hayes, the solitary Texas rancher, had become a bridge between worlds, proving that courage and compassion could unite even the most unlikely allies when genuine respect guided human interaction. If Jacob's courage and transformation into an Apache father moved you, hit that like button and subscribe now for more incredible frontier stories where bravery creates brotherhood. Would you have charged into that gunfight? Comment below.